at the car-making industry following some pretty shocking results from Peugeot Citroën. It's reported a loss of more than 800 million euros for the first half of the year. The CEO is at odds with the government when it comes to solving the problem. He wants to save money by cutting jobs and closing plants. The government says instead it will invest in green technologies and subsidise the sales of hybrid cars and electric cars, costing around 500 million euros over the next year. Well, a reminder of tonight's panel. Bill Stewart is an instructor in the American University of Paris's International Business Department. Also with us tonight, Berry Van Gestel is the director of Firm France. He's also the former chairman of Cadillac Corvette. Pascal Emmanuel Gobry is the founder of the research institute Noosphere. Now, before we continue tonight's discussions, let's take a look at some more figures, facts and figures coming thick and fast tonight for you, I'm afraid. We're looking at global car registrations. This is supposed to give us an idea of sales. I think we can have a look at that. There we go. Up. This is for the first quarter of this year, so up 50% in Japan, up 17% in the USA, up a tiny bit in Germany, but down hugely in France and Italy and down in Spain as well. Berry Van Gestel, what does this tell us?
First of all, there are some natural mishaps that happened last year in Japan. That's why Japan is so much higher. But the US is a good example. Look at what happened with Chrysler and look what happened to General Motors. They did close down plants. They did fire a lot of people. They went through a bankruptcy cycle. And what do they do now? They lost over $100 billion over the last 10 years. And they had a record profit last year. So it shows that if you do something about the overcapacity in a country, if you do something about the labor cost, Bill was saying $11. It used to be a lot higher, an awful lot higher. So you have to do something to become competitive. The proof of the pudding is there. General Motors went down, got back up. Ford went almost down, but they saved themselves. And Chrysler went down and were bought by Fiat. And they make profits now.
So all is not lost, is what you're saying. We shouldn't write off these car makers when we see shocking results like this.
No, it's a cycle everywhere with all car makers.
Let's look at another graph. This is sales of European car makers. Let's bring that one up for you. There we go. Now this is the main car makers here: Peugeot, Citroën, Renault, GM, and Fiat. And we can see in the first half, car sales plunged across the board for all of them. Bill Stewart, people just aren't buying cars in Europe anymore, are they?
No, not this year. They bought a lot of extra cars a couple of years ago because they were subsidized. And
is that the cash for clunkers?
The cash for clunkers type of thing. And since the government doesn't want to continue that, well, there's a bit of a drop. But a lot of people bought cars in anticipation. That is to say, they bought cars earlier than they planned on. And that shifted some of the sales from now to then. And now it's now, and they're not selling. In addition, there's a lot of concerns about the economy. Buying a car is a relatively large purchase for most people. And I just saw today, that Germany is paying its lowest interest rate in its history for debt, and Spain is paying its highest. And France may or may not be next, we'll see. But there's certainly a lot of jitters here. Whether or not Europe's going to end up in a major depression, I personally think so, but I'm not going to guarantee it. But I think there are a lot of people who are just plain worried, and hence they purchase fewer automobiles, significantly fewer.
I mean, and this is part of the problem for Peugeot, isn't it? I mean, 75% of its sales are here in Europe. I mean, obviously, the European market has taken the biggest hits over the past year. But on top of that, one sector that has been bucking the trend of the economic slump has been luxury goods. And Peugeot do not have a luxury car. I mean, these are two huge problems. I mean, surely somebody should have seen this coming.
Well, apparently they didn't. Clearly they didn't.
Maybe that's because they have a steel maker for a boss. I don't know.
Right. I mean, let's face it. Let's say the obvious thing, the last obvious thing we haven't been saying. Peugeot cars are not great. They're good, but they're not great. And if you're in a brutally...
They're runarounds, aren't they?
What
we call in the UK a runaround. You know, it's a little car you might take to pick up your kids and
Yeah,
run to
they're-
the shops. It's not the
they're-
thing you're going to drive across the country in.
I mean, or it's fine to have a runaround, but if a runaround is a car where you make 2% profit and the competition is brutal and your runaround car is fine, and over there you have a great runaround car which is cheaper, which is made by Volkswagen, which is cheaper and better, you're not going to buy the fine car. You're going to buy the good car, especially when it's a big purchase. So part of it is, if you make great products, in general, you're going to do well in the marketplace. The best product doesn't always win, but it tends to help, and that's also one problem. And so part of the problem is having a mix where it's too many small cars. Part of the problem is being too French. Part of the problem is being too European. And part of the problem is just not being great in a market where, because of these economies of scale, because of this competition, because of this oversupply, there's really only one guy who's going to make a profit because he's big enough and good enough. And right now, that's Volkswagen. Maybe 10 years from now, it's going to have switched around and it's going to be Peugeot. But right now...
Right, because Peugeot was on top 10 years ago, wasn't it? And everybody was everyone was calling Volkswagen the sick car maker of Europe, weren't they?
They've been all called sick car makers of Europe all around the world. There's another element that you should not forget either. Volkswagen is so cash rich that they can borrow money to their buyers for 1% a year. If Peugeot is financing the car for its customer, the customer is paying 13%, I think.
Right.
So it's the price of the car, it's the price of the vehicle. A runabout car, you need a car that brings your kids to the school and so forth. For that, you need a cheap car. And as was said already, you don't make money on it.
But this takes us back to the labour market problems, doesn't it? I mean, if it's costing so much to build these things and they're not selling them at a very high whack, that business model can't survive, can it?
Nope, absolutely not.
That's why they
what's
go to
proven.
the government.
Absolutely.
That's what is proven.
But you're being too hard, Laura, on steel
I am
executives.
quite hard. Oh, no, I'm sorry.
One of the greatest business stories, which my students are going to hear again and again, is a company called Nucor, which years ago was part of a bankrupt firm called Nuclear Corporation of America, which, in passing, was an outgrowth of Rio Automobiles, founded by Ransom E. Olds, after Oldsmobile got stolen from him. And they worked on their productivity. Today, they're the largest steel company in the United States. Now, they only pay their workers $90,000 a year, which means a cost to them of around $150,000, or roughly double what Peugeot people get. And they just worked on productivity the entire time. If you're going to sell something cheap, which...
What does that mean? Break that down for me. What does that mean? How do you increase productivity?
Well, in Nucor's particular case, they have a very strong team effort, and people are paid by what the team produces, which in France would be against the law. We have a new government. Maybe they'd like to make the labor market a little bit less rigid, even though they weren't elected to do that. They were elected to socialize it. But what the heck? They don't have to listen to the public as long as it works.
Well, they do say they want to reduce the burden of social charges on corporations.
Yes, that's very nice, but that's not.
Is that a step in the right direction?
But yeah, it's a step in the right direction. But a more important step is especially if you're going to sell something cheap. You're going to go down market. There's nothing wrong with going down market. Certainly, a steel company sells the cheapest steel that meets the quality constraints. But you don't paint steel green so the customer likes it. Whereas with automobiles, you do some things. But if you're going to be cheap, you have to be the cheapest, and they're not that. Therefore, when the market goes down, they get whipped around the head. Actually, they haven't done that bad, given that there's a 20% drop in European automobile sales. But they haven't done as well as General Motors, as well, 10% loss, a 10% drop, as well as Renault. And certainly the market doesn't like that, and I think quite rightly the politicians don't like that, but they're coming up with the wrong solution. They're acting as if the election's next year instead of just a few months ago.
The problem is this vicious cycle because you can't make money in cars because of this oversupply. So you go to the government for subsidies because otherwise you're going to have to close plants. And because you're subsidized, there's an oversupply in the market, which means you can't make money. And everybody is like that. It's not a French problem. It's not even a European problem. It's a global problem. It's certainly true in China. It's true in the United States, as we saw. And the problem, what would fix the market probably is one of those big car makers just failing. One of them needs to be bought out and or shut down, but at least shrunk. And who's going to let that happen? I mean, what government is going to say, yeah, we're going to lose a national champion and God knows how many jobs so that the market can be healthy, slightly healthier 5 years from now? So it's a vicious cycle.
I wonder what you think, because we haven't talked about it much. I wonder what you think of the British car making industry, because at the end of the night, the British car making industry. Well, at the end of the 80s,
it doesn't exist anymore.
They are making cars. No, at the end of the 80s, it was on its knees, wasn't it? And
and they
now
never
they're
got
on
up.
track for their first trade surplus since the 1970s. They are building cars. They might not be the cars that they designed, but they are building cars. They have factories. They've just got a huge investment recently in the north of England. They've seen a 30% rise in manufacturing over the last.
None of them are owned by the British.
No, exactly. But they are building cars. I mean, there are people with jobs in factories getting paid.
There's a good example in the British vehicle industry. There used to be the biggest truck manufacturer in the world called Leyland.
British Leyland, yeah.
British Leyland in the 60s.
Government
Where is it
owned.
now? A
Then
tiny
buried.
company out of Holland bought it. Then that company went also bankrupt. They closed down several factories and they are now thriving quite well. So what you need to do, and I think we all said it already, you have to attack the area where there's the problem. That's the overcapacity. If you have the right capacity and the right product, you can survive with the high labor rates. But bear in mind, in France, if you pay a laborer 100, it's cost an employer 150. In countries like Germany, it's 130. In Sweden, which is a very expensive country is 133. In Holland, it's 127. So there's a 15% higher cost of labor on the same production hour. And we're not talking about 35 hours, because if you're only working 35 hours, your productivity, as Bill would say, is not at the level that the other companies are. So you cannot just take one element, and as I've been saying, is a very small element, subsidize that, and then think, hey, all my problems are gone. All the other problems are still there. And you're subsidizing something that they hardly ever build, an electrical car.
I mean, is the way forward perhaps, I mean, in Europe they have the expertise, they know how to design cars, don't they? That's where the expertise is in Europe and in the United States. Should they just be focusing more on that and on investing in the new technologies and looking more down that road rather than trying to build the things?
No, because how many people can you employ designing cars? I mean, maybe it will come to that, but that would be a bit of a shame, because there's nothing wrong with the French or the European worker. They can read manuals, even read them in foreign languages, and make things. But they're mismanaged, and the government's plan to use electric cars to save the world here is also a mismanagement. I think at least the people here agree. I don't know if anybody from the government would come, but I think if they were here and they were being honest, they'd agree as well that this just isn't going to cut it. It's just not going to work. I don't know. I mean, I always think back to when François Mitterrand's friends were on the Michel Drucker show about 20 years ago, and singing his song about the rose and substituting new words, which, if you don't know that incident, it's too long to explain. But whether they'd be forthright or not is secondary. It's obvious that you don't revive an industry by working on a very, very, very small part of that industry, unless you make the price of gasoline like $8,000 a gallon, and then people will buy electric cars. But we're not at that point, and that would be quite absurd to do so, because then the French oil companies would all go broke.
You have to subsidize them.
Well, that's why you have a market that balances off these different interests. And right now, the market is pretty bad in Europe, and it's not getting better. I mean, the whole global macroeconomy, not just the automobile, but the macroeconomy is very doubtful, and we're not We're not optimistic. Well, I don't know of anybody who really is optimistic for the next year or two on the macroeconomy here.
What about focusing more on just on specialist cars then, on building specialist cars like, I don't know, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, those kind of things?
You all know.
Surely people in China and Russia, they want these special cars who are built in Europe by European experts. I mean,
no, even American cars. There's a Cadillac production in China, which is a long version of the existing Cadillac, a long version, because the Chinese want a long Cadillac. A normal size Cadillac is not big enough.
Bit more bling, bit more
impressive. But the whole thing is, if you have products that make people dream, then they are willing to spend a bit more money on it. So why would you dream about a 208 or a Volkswagen Lupo? Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. It's just to get your kids to the school and to get your courses and so forth. You buy your stuff.
And I'm guessing you don't really care so much what it looks like. If it's got a scratch or a few dents, you don't really need to replace it.
You have to go from place A to place B. Yeah. And a Ferrari nowadays is selling, but it's not that bright either. So you have to find a reason for people to start buying cars again, not buying discounts. Nowadays, the manufacturers and the brands are announcing, we will give you 18% discount. So the customer says, oh, 18% I got. What do you give us, Mr. Dealer? Can you give us another 10%? You're talking about discounts of 30% of the published price.
And it can't help that the environmental lobby are telling us all to leave our cars at home, don't have two cars, take the train, take the bus.
Yeah, if you want to bring your kids to the school, by car.
Yeah.
Preferably a big 4x4. I mean, but that's joking aside, but people want to go on holiday. People want to go to the sun. People want to buy their goods in the supermarket, which is a bit outside the city. Because what we've done is we bring those supermarkets outside the city. How the hell can you buy your stuff for a full family if you don't have a car? So,
and when the economy picks up, maybe people will start buying cars again.
Oh, they will.
They will.
I'm certain.
People will always buy cars. All right. On that note, we'll leave it there.
Individuality.
Okay, Barry Van Gestel, Pascal Emmanuel Gobry, and Bill Stewart as well. Thank you very much indeed to you all. Thanks to you for watching. That brings us to the end of tonight's debate. I'll be back with another one at the same time tomorrow. Good night.
Watch France 24 live and free on your mobile phone. Anywhere in the world, on almost any cell phone, whatever your provider. Watch France 24 live and in 3 languages. France 24 on your mobile phone. Just visit our website, france24.com, and click on mobile. Select your phone brand, enter your phone number, and you'll receive a free SMS telling you how to install our player. You can watch France 24 live and get the latest world news for free on your mobile.
Every week, France 24 brings you all the latest news from the world of sailing and water sports. Follow the action from the major international sailing events. Catch up with the latest technological advances from the boat shows. Join us. Become part of the crew. Connect with the world of sea lovers and water sports enthusiasts. Follow the Call of the Sea with Whirlwinds, Saturday, 12:40 p.m. Paris time on France 24.